Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the broadcast this evening. I trust it's going to be another exciting episode with Professor Bolaji Akinyemi. Prof, you are welcome to the program this evening.
Thank you very much.
Prof, before we get into the details of the program this evening, I remember you said you loved the red jersey. And I know Euro 2020 has been on. Any highlights of that for you, Prof? Any highlights on Euro 2020?
Well, they've just finished the first round, so to speak. Um, I've lost some of my favorite teams, like Scotland, and some of the others are still there. But, it's, in fact, to me, so far, the most interesting thing was what happened off the field before the competition even started, when Ronaldo pushed the Coca-Cola drinks away from him, and that led to the fall in the shares of the Coca-Cola. And I mean, in fairness to both parties, this was a conundrum. It's not an easy issue to address. But I finally, because I had at the back of my mind what also happened to Naomi at the French Open,
Yes.
when she took a stand based on health issues. So I think the players have to understand that the high wages, high price money, high salaries that they earn is because of the heavy investment, the heavy financial involvement of these corporations, Coca-Cola, the other soft drinks, and what have you. Is because of the high financial endorsement that the football associations or athletic association can then pay them the high salaries that they pay them. On the other hand, the sports association have to bear in mind that where there are health issues involved, like the high sugar content in soft drinks, which some people have said that at least responsible for obesity, especially in children and the young ones, that they may really need to forgo the financial endorsement you get from there, provided the sportsmen and women understand that this may then lead to, a more moderate fees which they earn. So that's why I said the more controversial things actually happened before the tournament started. There have been a few controversial penalties awarded,
Yes.
but as long as human beings, the referees and the linesmen, you know, mistakes will be made, I suppose.
But Prof, I want to ask you a question here because you've talked in the past about soft diplomacy. You've talked about sports being a way of executing against that. And when we look at what Coca-Cola lost, 2.8 billion pounds in the wake of the Cristiano Ronaldo issue, should our sportsmen and women be doing more to push narratives that impact foreign policy?
No. Foreign policy is a highly contentious field. If you ask me if they should be involved in social issues, like health issues, human rights. And when I say human rights, again, it will have to be human rights on a global consensual basis, like gender rights, Black rights matter, colored rights matter, women rights matter, and those kind of things on which there is a global consensus. Yes, they should. They shouldn't just live in isolation. As long as we play tennis well, the rest of what happens in the rest of the world doesn't concern us. As long as we play football well, what happens, outside that cubicle, we will not pay, we will not get involved. And we must admit that, especially since the Black Rights Matter, the Floyd murder, sportsmen and women have come out to be involved and to show their commitment. That's why they take a knee, which football men and women do now, in spite of the fact that some of them get booed. I applaud, and I think that is the kind of thing where we should give them our moral support for them to continue to take that stand. It's not pay for human rights. When you consider that people had Martin Luther King Jr. was killed, was shot. There are people who had been killed during the civil rights movement in the southern part of the United States. People are still getting killed even today. So being booed on the football field, to me, would be the least of the sacrifices that sportsmen and women be prepared to pay for their involvement in social issues.
All right. Prof, let us start with Russia today. And there's a question someone submitted that I want to pass across to you. And it says, Russia has an autocratic form of government since the beginning of time. The United Kingdom has a monarchy, Saudi Arabia has a theocracy, US has a democracy. Is it legitimate for one country to demand that another country adopt its own system of government as a basis for their bilateral relations, following which sanctions will be imposed? What is your view on that, Prof?
Number one, what one should be aiming for is whether the objectives are achievable or not. If the objectives are achievable, it are the only powerful country in the world with sufficient capability, economic, military, and on all aspects. You have the capability to overrun every country in the world. Then it's not a question of whether it becomes moral or not for you to then insist that every country must adopt your values, especially if those values also form the core of the United Nations values. Then, as I said, it won't be exercise. But where no one nation has that capability to overrun the others, then I think it's foolish for you to say you are going to base your foreign policy on other countries adopting your system of government, adopting your values, especially when you are not actually even perfect in those values that you espouse. The reason why, quite frankly, and I think a lot of us know this, in the 60s, in the 70s, African states were applauding the United States. Till today, one of my heroes is still John F. Kennedy. And yet at that time, African Americans were being lynched in the United States. If really one were to argue on a moral basis, African countries and African students and African whatever have no business admiring the United States. And the United States then did not deserve the, Nobel Prize status that you may say it was given because it was not conforming to its, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men and women now are created equal. The United States have never played up to that. But, we look at other areas where the United States, especially support for African independence. So to that extent, the questioner is quite right that you are serving notice that you are going to have an adversary relationship with some other countries in the world because it is impossible for them to adopt your values. So I wouldn't advocate that relationship between one country or the other should be based on, especially when there are differences in their value systems, should be based on one country adopting the value system of the other. You are simply serving notice that you are going to have an adversary relationship, and that doesn't pay anybody. You are not going to get it. And I think that you see, this is one of the deficiencies in concretization of the foundation of foreign policy objectives. When you have a country or a system where you must idealize your foreign policy. Oh, our foreign policy is based on human rights. Therefore, we expect every other country to fall in line. Our foreign policy is based on this ideology of socialism or communism, and we expect that every other country in the world, we will define every other country in the world as friend or foe, depending on whether they embrace our ideology. That to me shows a deficiency in mental, in the mental approach towards formulation of your foreign policy goals. You shouldn't do that. But that's not to say that you must embrace every country in the world. There will be some countries where their objectives will be hostile to yours. For example, if you have islands that you share in common, the boundaries, and all of a sudden one wants to rewrite the rules of the naval boundaries that you have shared, then you can't. There are so many examples, that one can give, but not on ideological values. So the questioner is right.
All right, Prof. Thank you for that. Let's look at the issue of Russia and Myanmar. Earlier on in the week, we heard that the Russian defense minister had indicated they were building stronger ties and they were going to strengthen military ties with Myanmar. What is your view on this, considering what is happening in Myanmar today?
Well, that is a perfect illustration of what I was talking about earlier on. Russia had come to the conclusion that the parameters set out by NATO and the EU and, of course, the United States, that those parameters are leading to a hostile relationship between them and Russia. And that to that extent, parameters are being set which automatically are excluding Russia from a cooperative relationship, a positive relationship. Therefore, they are going to now look for areas in the world that the West itself had pegged an adversarial relationship with, and Russia will seek to have a relationship with that country. The enemy of my enemy is then going to become my friend. Now, this is nothing new. The reason why Russia or the Soviet Union went into Cuba in the 60s was precisely because the United States was determined to crush the Cuban Revolution and get rid of Fidel Castro. And since the Soviet Union and the United States had this hostile relationship, Russia or the Soviet Union was going to break out of that by extending a hand of friendship towards Cuba. And of course, we saw the way the the United States reacted. Although the full story of how the Cuban Missile Crisis was was negotiated down has still not been told till today, because people have often felt it was a victory for the United States. Actually, both sides gave something. It was only what the Russians gave that was publicized, because we are all dependent on Western news sources. The fact that the United States closed down its military base in Turkey, which the Soviet Union had wanted all along, was never publicized. But the United States closed down its own military base in Turkey in exchange for the Soviet Union withdrawing the missile, bases in Cuba. But this shows that several countries have alternative moves that they can make to irritate you if you continue to irritate them. Why we are still on this question of Russia, because I don't know whether it's another thing that is going to come up in your questions. Take the question of Crimea
Absolutely.
and what happened last week between the naval forces of Russia and Great Britain. Yes, the West has taken the position that it will not accept Russian annexation of the Crimea, even though there's very little they can do about it. But to have sent a British naval ship to that area and put a BBC reporter on board that ship, to me shows it was meant to provoke Russia. And the fact that the Russians have not only fired on the ship and dropped bombs in its naval path showed to me that Russia was not going to accept that as normal behavior. It was more like Britain raising the ante. And why would Britain do this at this time? I mean, Russia annexed the Crimea how many years ago? 3, 4? Why now? That worries me. I hope Biden has not sent wrong signals to Europe, to NATO members, as to how far United States. That's me. I hope that, because one of the things that often leads to war is misinterpretation, getting the signals wrong, and giving the body language of the Prime Minister of Great Britain, Boris Johnson, not only towards the European Union, but towards even the members of his own country. It looks to me as is the type who is prepared to start a war just in order to prove that he's a tough guy, you know, a new sheriff in town who is prepared to, pull the irons out of the fire just to prove a point. So I hope it won't get to that stage. I hope not.
Prof,
Because
there's
I'm
a
not sure. Because I'm not sure that the United States will be prepared to go to war with Russia over the Crimea.
Yeah, Prof, I was going to ask, in light of that question about foreign policy and the different ideologies of countries, what right does the United Kingdom have to be pushing Russia on Crimea when we have the issue from way back in the Falklands, where the United Kingdom went all the way there and they fought that war in the Falklands? Why are they now feeling that they have the right to be telling Russia, don't do anything with Crimea?
Well, if I were still teaching in the university, I will ask one of my students, one of my postgraduate students, to write a thesis based on the Crimea in British foreign policy, because it goes way, specifically problem over Crimea goes way back in terms of the crisis for British foreign policy. But it also then links up with what you've just said about the Falklands. When countries, especially European countries, are at the peak of their power, they are stretched out, and they continue to want to hold on to what they captured at that time. But then, which is on the basis of why Margaret Thatcher was prepared to go halfway around the world to fight that battle in the Falklands. Well, Crimea has been what? Crimea's relationship also with Russia, Soviet Union, and what have you. It has a long history. And there was a time when haphazardly the authorities in Moscow, when the Soviet Union was the Soviet Union, was just busy allocating, islands, territories, and what have you to its constituent state elements, irrespective of what I will call the ethnic identity of the territories they were busy passing around. Now, when the Soviet Union then started to break up, then the ethnic identity became a major issue, not only in the Crimea, but also in Ukraine, also in Georgia, where there were Russian-speaking minorities, but who had been then parceled on to become part of non-Russian territories. And it became an issue. We as Africans will immediately recognize the crisis of identity posed by this issue of ethnic identity, because what we really usually write off is, well, the Europeans created artificial boundaries in Africa, boundaries that took no cognizance of presence of ethnicities in those areas during the Berlin Conference, and that for stability in Africa, we will accept those artificial boundaries that we inherited at independence. What in international law is the iutis possidetis doctrine. The same thing has turned up in Europe. That's why you had the Yugoslavian Civil War. And that is what is happening in even the United Kingdom, where the Scots are saying we want to go. We are not English. We were conquered by the English. And for your prime minister to go fishing in Crimean waters, when in its own background, he's got the Scottish issue and probably the Welsh issue, definitely the North Ireland issue to face, looks to me a bit silly, really.
One last point before we leave there, Prof. Do you see this escalating to a war?
I'm afraid so. That's why I said earlier that I hope that Biden has not given false hopes to NATO countries about how far the United States is prepared to go in confronting Russia. You remember in the communique that came out of the EU, I believe, all those summits, this Group 7, EU, NATO were so close to each other that I really can't, in my brain now, separate the communiques. But in one of those communiques, while China was called an area of special interest, I believe it was called, Russia was called, what was it called? I think Russia was called either an area of hostility or something like that. In other words, Russia was separated out and given almost the label of an enemy, while China was kind of, if you like, stepped down as just an area of special interest. I hope that there will be a call from Biden to the British Prime Minister, don't send any more warships through that area. Because if Russia sinks one of your ships and you decide to retaliate, we will not come to your aid. I hope that call will be made very, very soon.
All right. Prof, let's move to Iran.
But please, before you move on, let me say this. I do not condone what Russia did in Crimea or in Georgia or in Ukraine. I do not condone war. Condemnation, yes, and then let it go. I mean, there are so many parts of the world where there are conflicts that cannot be resolved on moral basis. And so we've designed a system. The UN Security Council has been very good on that. They will issue a statement of concern. They will issue a statement of condemnation, but they will not go as far as sanctions or putting troops. They may put peacekeeping troops there, but to go and start, fighting troops, enforcement action. No. So there are all those gradations that have been worked out within the United Nations system that recognizes the limitation of power in resolving every issue in the world.
All right, sir. Back to Iran, Prof. We now have a new leader in Iran, one generally regarded as a hardliner. And we've seen quite a lot of movement in terms of a foreign policy, I would say, in Iran. For example, there is the point around Iran saying that the United States is going to lift oil sanctions on them. How do you respond to that, Prof?
No, I mean, you are right. This was credited to the Iranian news agency. I suspect that this question of lifting of oil sanctions is probably one of the issues already resolved in the peace talks that had been going on since January, when Biden's administration came in. All issues had not been resolved. And I suspect that the United States, during the negotiation, I said, we have no problem, lifting oil sanctions. But what the Iranians have not added is probably there's a proviso there, provided you do this and you do that and so on. So the leak was just one aspect and this happens in negotiations when you have several issues that are linked. And one side says, yes, I mean, you want us to lift oil sanctions, we are prepared to do that, but you also now must be prepared to bring your ballistic missiles under the IAEA limitation objective. You must be prepared to curtail your activities, your own foreign policy. So, and I think that what we have now is just one side, and that's the Iranian side, leaking in order to strengthen his hand. The hard line of the new president-elect, because I don't think he's been sworn in, of the president-elect in Iran creates several new dimensions. Number one, in the Middle East. Number two, in the relationship between the United States and Iran. Number three, in the relationship between Iran and Israel. Number four, relationship between Iran and Saudi Arabia. The soft language adopted towards Saudi Arabia by Iran gives me the impression that the tactics they want to adopt is to try to drive a wedge in the relationship between Saudi Arabia and Iran. I don't think they will succeed. I think the Saudis are kind of smarter, but I can see why Iran may think this is a card worth playing. Again, because of something we spoke about at the very beginning. The question, your questionnaire sent in, if the United States if the Biden administration is going to, hedge its policy towards Saudi Arabia based on the human rights posture of Saudi Arabia, then Saudi Arabia. But as I said, I think the Sauds are smarter than that. Biden has 4 years. That's the only certainty. And the Saudis may be prepared to, withstand a less warm, it will never be hostile, a less warm relationship with the United States than ditch the United States and go into the warm embrace of the Iranian government. I don't think it will go that
far. Prof, let's look at, while on the Middle East, let's look at the fact that the Afghan president has been invited to the White House and is going to be meeting President Biden in the White House. One of the key items we understand will be on the agenda is the withdrawal of troops. Do you see President Biden changing his mind about troops withdrawal at all?
From Afghanistan?
Yes.
No. That is set. That is set in stone, I'm afraid, because that's a bipartisan foreign policy objective. The Trump administration had, in fact, if he was still there, the troops would be out by now. So his flank from the Republican side discovered highly predictable consequence of a foreign policy decision. Everybody knows. Everybody. And I think if you, again, about 9 months ago on this very program, I drew attention to the Vietnamese, the the Vietnamese paradigm, where the Americans knew as soon as they pull out of Vietnam, the North Vietnamese, who were called the Viet Cong at that time, were going to take over South Vietnam. But says, don't rub our face in it. Give us time, to run up the flag and say we left an independent, South Vietnam there, and give us a bit of time. We know you are going to go in. Before you go in, I said that about 9 months ago, that's what is going to happen in Afghanistan. They're going to are better trained. They are united with a structure of leadership that is recognized. And again, I've said this several times, that the civilian Afghan government has behaved like spoiled children. American troops were there, they were protecting them, and yet politically, the Afghan civilian elite were fighting each other. Even the last election, the two of them, the two leaders, went to swear themselves in on two different platforms. It was the Americans again who had to step and say, you can't do this, not as long as we are here. Before they then agreed that one will be president, the other one, I've forgotten the title he used. This happened under Trump. This happened under Obama. So it was like where we will be playing our childish games while American blood is being sacrificed on the battlefields of Afghanistan. Now that the Americans say, we've had enough, we are going home. Well, I give you, probably watch it in the next 90 days, how many Afghan elite will be going into exile and leaving Afghanistan because they know what is going to happen. Because of the lack of cohesion among the political elite, you couldn't have a functioning Afghan national army. You couldn't have a functioning Afghan police unit. You couldn't have an Afghan air force. You couldn't. They were depending on American air cover. Whereas if they had sat up and decided to play the democratic card, they probably could have had a united country under them, which they never did. All the time the Americans were there, the Afghans didn't have a united country under them.
Prof, let's go to Cuba. There's some good news coming out of Cuba. And this is with regards to their coronavirus candidate vaccine. And the news is that they've achieved 92% efficacy after 3 doses of that. We talked about Cuba a while ago and the impact that United States sanction has had on the economy of Cuba. But what is your take on this new piece of information that is coming out, Prof?
Well, actually, I was going to start this program on this good news this week with reference to what you've just referred to in in Cuba. But I think well, you set up the pace on football. I'm so happy as to what has happened in Cuba. I'm so elated because Cuba is a black country. Cuba, Cuban achievement can be credited as black achievement. Cuba has so identified with Africa since the years, including sending troops to fight in Angola. In fact, the turnaround in the anti-apartheid struggle happened when the Cuban troops defeated the South African troops in Angola and pushed them back into South Africa. That was when the turnaround came, that apartheid's end had come. And that those of us who knew what was going on credited it to Cuba. The role Cuba played during the Ebola crisis in Sierra Leone, Guinea, Liberia. They didn't just anchor a ship out there on the shoreline of these countries. They actually put medical troops on the ground to help battle Ebola in these countries. So well, I suppose you call them Afro-Cuban or whatever it is. They have over-identified with Africa. Therefore, to me, their victory is our victory. I met Comrade Fidel Castro many times at OAU summits, at non-aligned country summits. And you could see this man saying, look, whatever Africa wants from him, he will do. But we were also under enormous pressure from the United States not to get too close to Cuba. Now, under the Biden administration, hopefully he will take over from where Obama administration left off. He will not be hostile towards African countries COVID-19 vaccine. Incidentally, that is not the only vaccine that Cuba had developed. They also have been working on malaria vaccine, and they are on stage 2 of that. I cannot think of anything more important and more strategic to African health than battling malaria. We lose more people from malaria than from COVID-19 or any other virus for that matter. And I think that, yes, Cuba is short of funds. This is one area where countries like Nigeria, South Africa, maybe Botswana can cooperate, making funds available to Cuba in exchange for supply of vaccine to us, and Cuba helping us develop in Africa the capability for manufacture, technical assistance, because obviously they have the technical capability. They can help Africa in this area. And I hope that we will get a cooperative nod from the United States, not to block any cooperative relationship in this area with Cuba. So I do congratulate the Cuban regime, the Cuban government. I applaud their achievement in spite of the embargoes on them. In spite of that, look how far they have gone. They deserve our applause, believe me.
Thank you very much for that, Prof. There is another point here, but I'm not sure we can take it this week. Maybe we'll start with it next week, Prof, because I think you would probably want to do justice to it. And it's this news of the closure of the largest pro-democracy paper, Apple Daily, in Hong Kong. But I know that we don't have enough time for you to do justice. We'll bring it up next week, Prof. Can you hear me, sir?
No, I couldn't hear that last one.
Oh, sorry. It's about the closure of the largest pro-democracy paper in Hong Kong. But we cannot take it today. We'll bring that next week, Prof, because we've run out of time. And on that note, thank you to our viewers. Thank you for joining us this evening. Prof?
Wakanda. Peace.
Thank you, Prof. And we'll see you all next week. Thanks for joining.